If lately you have felt your body getting a little weaker, even though you are eating fine and your daily routine has not really changed, you are not the only one noticing this. I see this happen quite often. And what is interesting is that most people tell themselves it is just age, or they assume they have not been trying hard enough. But the truth is, it is not that simple. Many people are still getting enough protein, still taking vitamins, still keeping the same familiar habits. Yet one thing has changed, and almost no one notices it at first. The body is no longer handling nutrients the way it used to. This is not because you are lazy, and it is not because you lack discipline. It is because, after a certain point, the internal biological signals begin to slow down. Nutrition still goes in, but the muscles do not receive the message as clearly as before. I am not saying this based on textbooks. I have seen it repeat itself over many years of work, and honestly, there were times when I had to stop and rethink how I was looking at my own body as well. The good news is this: you do not need to train harder, and you do not need to force yourself into things that no longer fit. What matters more is sending the right biological signals so the muscles know what to do with what you give your body each day. And once this point becomes clear, a lot of what comes next starts to make much more sense. What concerns me is not that the body changes over time. That part is natural. What catches my attention more is how quietly those changes tend to happen. There is no sharp pain. There is no single morning where you wake up and everything feels different. It happens little by little. At first, it may be taking a few extra seconds to stand up from a chair. It may be that your arms tire sooner when you carry groceries, or you finish a familiar task and feel more worn out than you would have before, even though nothing about the task itself has really changed. These signs are easy to overlook because they do not set off any immediate alarm. In medicine, we do have a name for this process, but honestly, you do not need to remember the term. What matters more is understanding this. Muscle can decline gradually without pain, without inflammation, and without any clear sense that something is wrong. Because of that, many people only notice it when something that used to feel simple suddenly feels harder than they expected. At that point, the natural reaction is to think, maybe I just need to exercise more. But the truth is, that is not always realistic. When the body already feels tired and the joints are not as flexible as they once were, pushing harder can sometimes make things feel worse. I have seen many people try that approach and then grow discouraged when the body does not respond the way they hoped. The issue here is not that you have not done enough, and it is not that the muscles are broken. The issue is that the way the body communicates with muscle changes over time. The signals that used to be clear become weaker, and they move more slowly. And if that shift is not understood, a lot of effort that comes later can easily head in the wrong direction. This is why it makes sense to pause here and look again at how the body's working before talking about any specific solution at all. When you look at this long enough, you begin to notice a very clear pattern. It is not that the body suddenly becomes weak. It is that the way the body responds to nutrition has changed. This is not a personal impression. There is a very real biological basis behind it. After a certain point, muscle cells become less sensitive to insulin than they once were. Insulin works like a key. It helps move nutrients, especially protein, into muscle tissue. When that sensitivity declines, you may still eat the same way and take the same supplements, but the muscles are no longer opening the door as readily. The nutrients enter the body, but they do not reach the place where they are most needed. I often explain this in a simpler way. It is not that you lack raw material, it is that the signal telling the body how to use that material has weakened, and when that signal is weaker, the body tends to prioritize other functions instead of maintaining muscle the way it once did. This is why some very ordinary things in daily life become more important than people expect. Take coffee in it, for example. Not because it is magical, but because it can help reactivate part of the biological signaling that the body has begun responding to more slowly. I often describe it like this. Coffee is like turning the power back on at a work site. Once the power is on, things can run again. But turning on the power alone does not build anything. And this is where many people misunderstand the role of coffee. It is not a miracle. It does not build muscle by itself. What it does is create a foundation that allows what you put into your body to be used more effectively. When signaling improves, the same amount of nutrition can lead to very different results. And when you see this point clearly, it becomes easier to understand why adding the right thing at the right time can matter far more than simply trying to do more. Once you understand that the issue is really about signaling, not just how much nutrition you take in, the next question comes up very naturally. Where do you even start without making everything complicated? And the answer is usually much simpler than people expect. One of the most overlooked things is sitting right there in the kitchen: cinnamon. Not because it is magical, but because it acts on the exact point we were just talking about: insulin sensitivity. When insulin works more effectively, muscles tend to listen to nutritional signals more clearly. The same meal, the same amount of protein, but the way the body handles it can be very different. I have seen this over and over again. Some people do not make any major changes to their diet. They simply add cinnamon regularly, and after a while, they notice everyday tasks feel a little less heavy. It is not a dramatic change you feel right away. It is more a sense that the body is cooperating better. Honestly, it is the kind of change you usually notice only when you look back. What matters is choosing the right kind. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes called true cinnamon, is different from the kind most often found on grocery store shelves. Cassia cinnamon has a very strong aroma, but it is not always the best option for long-term use. Ceylon cinnamon is gentler. It is safer for daily use, and it still provides the biological effect we are looking for. How you use it does not need to be complicated. A small amount each day is enough. This is why I often start with adjustments like this. Quiet, simple. They may not draw attention, but they help the body respond better to everything you do afterward. Once you begin adjusting the basic signals, there is another small detail that many people tend to overlook: vitamin C. Not because it is rare or hard to find, but because its role in tissue repair is often underestimated. Vitamin C does not build muscle by itself, but without enough of it, the process the body uses to make collagen becomes much less efficient. And as we just talked about, collagen is a key structural component that helps muscles and joints move smoothly. So sometimes the issue is not how much more you add, but that what you already have is not being fully used. What I want to emphasize here is simple. You do not need a high dose, and you do not need to make this complicated. In real life, the body tends to respond best to adjustments that are moderate and consistent. A small amount of vitamin C each day is usually enough to support this process properly. How you take it can be very flexible. Some people like to squeeze a little lemon into their coffee after it has cooled down. Others choose a supplement, around 500 milligrams. There is no single right choice, as long as it is something you can keep doing. I often say this is the kind of adjustment that does not draw much attention, but when it is combined the right way, it makes the steps that follow far more effective. And when the body starts responding more clearly, you begin to see why choosing the right biological signals matters as much as anything else. When people hear the word collagen, many immediately think about skin, hair, or nails. That is not wrong, but it is only a small part of the picture. In reality, collagen is one of the most important structural materials in the body, especially when it comes to muscles and joints. Collagen forms tendons, the fascia that wraps around muscles, and the internal framework that allows muscle fibers to work together. When that framework weakens, the feeling is usually not sharp pain. It is more often a loss of strength, a loss of firmness, or the sense that the body no longer responds the way it used to. You may still be trying, but the force does not carry through the same way. The challenge is that after a certain point, the body does not produce collagen as efficiently as before. The need is still there, but the supply gradually falls behind. And without enough collagen, even if protein intake is adequate, the body struggles to maintain muscle structure and joint stability. I have seen this many times. Some people do not change their activity at all, yet over time they notice their grip is weaker, objects feel less secure in the hand, or joints feel a bit less stable. When collagen peptides are added consistently, the response is usually quiet. Not sudden muscle growth, but strength returning to the hands, a firmer feeling when gripping, and less joint discomfort during daily tasks. Honestly, those are small changes, but they matter. What matters here is the form. Collagen peptides are already broken down, which makes them easier for the body to absorb. You do not need a high dose, and you do not need to expect immediate results. This is about supplying building material, not stimulation. And when the structural layer is supported properly, many people begin to notice something clearly. The body feels more prepared for what comes next. After talking about collagen as the structural framework, the next question usually comes up very naturally. Where does muscle get the actual material it needs to maintain itself and recover? And this is where many people have not quite looked closely enough. Collagen matters, but it does not provide all the essential amino acids that muscle tissue requires. You can think of collagen like the frame of a house. The frame is there, but to finish the structure, you still need the right building materials. That part comes from complete protein. The problem is that over time, eating larger amounts of meat is not as easy as it once was. Digestion slows down. A heavy feeling becomes more common. Sometimes even the idea of a high-protein meal feels uncomfortable. I hear this often, and honestly, it makes sense. This is where lighter forms of protein start to matter. A good quality whey protein, or essential amino acids in their pure form, can deliver exactly what muscles need without placing extra strain on digestion. You do not need large amounts, and you do not need them every day. It is about timing and using the right amount. The key point here is not eating more. It is eating in a way that fits how the body works now. As the body changes, the approach needs to change with it. Muscle does not ask for volume, it asks for quality and the ability to actually use what is provided. And when this material is supplied in a clean, easy to absorb way, many people begin to notice something clearly. Daily tasks no longer feel as draining as before. At that point, the question of energy, the part that allows muscle to truly use everything already in place, almost inevitably comes into focus. Once the framework is in place and the right materials are available, many people still notice something that feels confusing at first. The body seems to tire faster than expected. Not exhaustion, but a lack of strength during familiar, everyday tasks. At that point, the issue is usually no longer protein. It is how the body creates and uses energy. This is where MCT oil begins to matter. Not because it is a fat, but because the body handles MCT in a very different way. MCT is absorbed quickly and converted directly into ketones, a form of energy that muscles, especially bodies shaped by many years of adaptation, tend to use quite efficiently. This matters more than many people realize. When easy energy is not available, the body has to find other ways to keep going. Over time, some of that energy can come from muscle tissue itself, quietly, without obvious warning signs, just a gradual loss that adds up. When MCT is used properly, I often see a very consistent response. Fatigue during familiar activities is the first thing to ease. Not a rush, not a burst of energy, just a sense that the body is cooperating again. Honestly, it is a very everyday kind of change. You usually notice it one day when things simply feel a bit lighter. MCT oil does not require much. A small amount is enough for the body to recognize that energy is available. And when the body no longer has to scramble for fuel, it tends to preserve muscle more effectively. And at this point, another detail starts to come into focus. When energy is delivered quickly and cleanly, the body also needs support to keep everything in balance during that process. When energy starts coming in faster, as it does with MCT, a very practical change takes place in the body. The demand for electrolytes goes up. This is something many people miss, not because it is complicated, but because it is rarely talked about. Electrolytes do not create energy, but they decide whether that energy is used smoothly or not. Sodium, potassium, magnesium. These minerals help nerve signals travel properly and allow muscles to contract in a steady, coordinated way. When they are low, the feeling is usually not pain and not an obvious problem. It is more subtle, lightheadedness, getting tired faster, or a sense that the body is just not moving as smoothly as it used to. I see this fairly often, especially when someone begins using MCT or later adds creatine. The energy is there, but if electrolytes do not keep pace, the body has to work harder just to stay balanced. That feeling is easy to misread, as if something does not suit the body or the supplement itself is the problem. Most of the time, the explanation is much simpler. The body is asking for basic minerals to operate safely. A small amount of good quality mineral salt or a simple electrolyte formula is often enough to bring things back into balance. Nothing complicated, no need to overdo it. When electrolytes are restored to the right level, many people notice everyday fatigue easing quite clearly. And once this foundation is steady, the body is far more ready to respond to the things that help real strength build over time. Once the electrolytes are steady, the body no longer has to scramble to stay balanced every time more energy comes in. At that point, another issue tends to show itself. It is not a lack of immediate energy, but a lack of stored energy. This is where creatine really matters. And I want to be clear about this from the start. Creatine is not something meant only for the gym. Some of the strongest research on creatine in recent years has focused on people over 60 and on very everyday things. Standing up, walking, maintaining grip strength, not running out of steam during familiar movements. Creatine works like a backup battery for the muscles. It helps quickly regenerate ATP, the energy muscles rely on for short, repeated efforts throughout the day. Not to make you stronger for a brief moment, but to keep muscles from running dry halfway through. When creatine is used properly, the first change is usually not how the body looks. What changes is available strength. Getting up feels smoother. Steps feel more stable. Gripping no longer takes as much effort. Small details, but hard to miss if you pay attention. There is one thing worth saying plainly. To avoid confusion, weight may go up slightly when starting creatine. This is not fat. It is water held inside muscle cells, a sign that muscles are better hydrated and better supplied with energy. That is why drinking enough water and keeping electrolytes steady is not optional. When those pieces are in place, creatine does not make the body feel heavy. It simply keeps muscles from being drained each time you need to use your strength. And from there, everyday tasks stop taking quite as much out of you. When strength no longer drops off midway and the body no longer has to brace itself for familiar tasks, a very common situation tends to appear. Things feel better, but progress still moves slowly. Not worse, just not moving forward anymore. And this is where many people start to feel confused. In medicine, There is a fairly direct name for this. It is called anabolic resistance. What it means is this: muscles still have energy, they still have raw materials, but the signal to begin building is not clear enough. It is like a system that is fully set up, but never quite receives the start command. Leucine is that signal, not protein in general, but leucine specifically. It is an amino acid that activates mTOR, the central mechanism that tells muscles to shift into repair and rebuilding. When leucine does not reach the needed threshold, muscles tend to take in nutrients passively rather than actively putting them to work. This explains something many people find frustrating. Some eat plenty of protein, some take whey consistently, and yet progress remains slow. The issue is not total protein intake, it is the activation dose. After a certain point, the body needs a clearer signal to move from simply holding on to actually rebuilding. Leucine does not need to be taken in large amounts. In fact, taking too much does not add benefit. What matters is the right threshold, at the right time. Often with a protein-containing meal or after light activity, when that signal is strong enough, muscles finally begin to use effectively what has already been prepared. I have seen many cases where adjusting just this one point makes the whole process feel more coherent. Not dramatic, not sudden. Things simply start moving in the right direction, and at that stage, the practical question usually shifts. It is no longer about what works, but about how far to go and where it makes sense to stop. In practice, when things have started moving in the right direction, I often see the same situation come up again and again. It is not a lack of information. It is that people begin to wonder whether to keep adding more or whether stopping here already makes sense. The way I look at this is fairly simple. The body does not respond well when everything is added at once. It responds better when things are done in clear stages, enough to feel an effect, and only then deciding whether to go further. Most people do not need to jump straight to the highest level. The first level is the easiest one, and it is also the foundation. Ceylon cinnamon, collagen peptides, and vitamin C. These do not create an immediate kick, but they help reset how the body handles nutrients. When this base is steady, many people notice their grip feels more consistent, their joints feel less irritated, and familiar tasks feel a little lighter. For quite a few people, getting to this point alone is enough to feel the body working with them again. The second level is when energy becomes the main focus. The foundation stays the same, but MCT oil and lighter protein are added. Not every day, and without forcing a rigid schedule. The goal here is to keep the body from running short when strength is needed, and to have materials that are easy to absorb when required. Many people stay at this level for quite a while and feel stable there. The third level is for deeper support. This is where creatine comes in for storage, leucine to trigger rebuilding, electrolytes to maintain balance, and magnesium in the evening to support recovery. This is not mandatory. It only makes sense once the first two levels feel familiar, and you understand how your own body responds. What I always emphasize is this: this is not a checklist to complete. It is a way to know where you are, and not push beyond what your body is responding well to. And once that becomes clear, the decisions that follow tend to feel much lighter. When things are laid out in stages like this, I often see a few familiar concerns show up fairly early. Not because people do not understand, but because everyone starts comparing it to their own situation. And if these things are not addressed directly, it becomes very easy to stop before the body has a chance to respond. The first thing I hear most often is, "I cannot really exercise." In reality, most of what we have talked about does not depend on heavy workouts or following a strict training schedule. These biological signals still work when you walk, stand up and sit down, do things around the house, or simply move regularly through the day. I have seen many people change nothing about their activity level, adjust only the foundation, and still see clear improvement. Exercise can help, but it is not a requirement to begin. The second concern usually sounds like this: I do not want to take too many things. That is completely reasonable. And that is exactly why I talk about levels, not a long list. You start with a small amount, watch how the body responds, and only then decide whether anything else is needed. The body does not respond well to being pushed. It responds better to changes that are modest and consistent. Then some people say it plainly: I am taking medication. In that case, there is no need to rush. No supplement should be taken blindly while under treatment. If there is any doubt, bring what you are considering and talk it through with the doctor who follows your care. A clear conversation is always better than guessing. What all of these concerns have in common is this: they are not reasons to stop, but reasons to begin more slowly and with intention. When you are no longer tense about doing things right or wrong, the body often gives clearer feedback. And from there, what truly fits you tends to reveal itself over time. When we reach this point, there is one thing I want to say very clearly, and I want to say it plainly. The body after 60 is not broken. It has never betrayed you. What has changed is not the value of the body, but the way it receives and responds to biological signals. What we have talked about is not a formula you have to follow, and it is not a promise that doing everything right will take you back 30 years. The truth is, no one really needs that. What matters more is understanding that the body can still adapt. If you speak to it in a language it can still recognize. I have seen many people make just a few small adjustments at their own pace, and the body begins to cooperate again. Not in a dramatic way. Just standing up feels lighter. Daily tasks take less out of them. There is a sense of being back in control of their own movement. For me, that alone is a meaningful change. You do not have to do everything, and you do not have to do it quickly. The choice is always yours: where to start, where to pause, and whether to continue. The body will give you clear enough feedback if you give it time. And if there is one thing I would want you to carry with you after this video, it is this: when the body is spoken to in the right biological language, it still knows how to respond in its own very personal way.